my dear friends from the Reckoning with Racism in Nursing project are here today to present their work. StoryCenter and myself have had the deep honor of supporting this project over the last couple of years. And we've learned a tremendous amount about all the work that remains to be done to shift the cultures of our healthcare environments so that the people that work there can thrive and grow and have a sense of belonging that unfortunately has not been the history of the past. And so they're going to be taking the meeting over shortly, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Lucinda, to welcome folks. And I think that's what was on the agenda. If not, whoever was going to do it. But on my notes, I hand it to Lucinda Canty, and okay. I'll let you do self-introductions because the list of what you've done and what you do is too long for me. It's all yours, Lucinda.
Okay, and I just want to say that our team is all here before I get into the background of this project. So we have Dr. Gail Robinson, Dr. Rayanne LeBlanc, we have Ms. Frankie Manning, Sharon Lattimore Mosley, and recently Dr. Tia Vo. So we're all going to be presenting to you. So I just want to introduce everyone before, and they're going to say more about who they are and why they're a part of this project. But I want to start with just giving a background, just to put it into context, how this project and where it originated from. So the summer of 2020, we know that there was a lot going on that year. COVID, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. And during that time, I was approached by Dr. Peggy Chin and Dr. Christina Narity. They wanted to do something to address racism. They knew they wanted a webinar. They really didn't know the format. So we worked together to get that format together. But for me, before 2020, if two white nurses approached me and said they want to talk about racism, I would say no. And so for me, being a nurse, at this point, it was about 30 years, I never talked about race and racism out loud. So I, dealing with George Floyd, having a Black son, Breonna Taylor, a Black woman, those both had an impact on me mentally and pretty much even physically. And I was also completing my PhD, which I was experiencing racism at a couple of times during the program, but it was when I was trying to complete my program that I had to really fight and negotiate my way through. And Peggy Chin was someone who helped me through that process. So when she approached me, I had no problem at all saying that I want to be a part of this. And then the last piece that really said, as nurses, we have to do better was my own research into Black maternal health and knowing that racism kills Black pregnant women who come in the system healthy. And that was all difficult for me at the time to put all those pieces together. So I said that I agreed to be a part of this. I didn't hesitate because of all those pieces, but I did not want any harm to come to nurses of color. I didn't want myself to be exploited. I was asked to be the host. It was a 5-week series. And both Peggy Chin and Christina Narity took those, what I wanted very seriously. And so we developed guiding principles. We called them the principles of reckoning to help guide the discussions. And during this 5-week session, even though we changed this, and again, this is overdue reckoning on addressing racism in nursing, we, in our initial 5 weeks, white nurses could not speak. They could only listen because of this, our experience of telling our stories, our experiences. And someone saying, oh, are you sure? Or I don't really, I don't understand. Or you having to explain. So we wanted the platform to be that you tell your story, you tell your experience and not be interrupted. And so I want to share the principles of reckoning. And we read this at every session. We brought this along into the documentary project. And after I read the principles, I'm going to tell you how we went from the overdue reckoning on addressing racism in nursing to the RN's Reckoning with Racism documentary project. So these are the principles of reckoning. We claim the courage to join together through the experience of building our anti-racist capacity in nursing. We cherish their contributions and honor the voices of Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and other nurses of color, and yield the floor to those voices throughout our time together. We recognize we cannot move forward without a deep understanding of the experiences of racism. The insights and recommendations of Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and other nurses of color are vital to ground our thinking and guide our actions. We pledge to deeply listen and respect any and all expressions of anger, rage, despair, grief arising from racism. We commit to healing those harmed by racism. We commit to challenging, resisting, and ending the voices and actions that sustain white privilege. We seek and nurture authentic anti-racist awareness. And our last principle, we will inspire and nurture action as we boldly claim an anti-racist identity for nursing. And so those are our principles of reckoning, which we have been told that they can really go to any area, any profession, and still ring true. So we wanted to center on the voices of nurses of color. And for me, it was a transformative period because I was no longer alone and I was able to hear other stories. And as I heard these stories, I reflected on my own experience as a nursing student, as a nurse, as a midwife. And I realized that these stories, if I heard them when I was a student, or even when I was thinking about becoming a nurse, if I heard these stories throughout, I wonder how I would have been able to navigate a system that I often felt like didn't want me to be there. And I didn't just hear stories of pain, of trauma. When I heard nurses of color share, I heard stories of strength, nurses who were educated and knowledgeable and made significant contributions to nursing, and even helped me to see that racism is not my imagination, because all these nurses had education, they had experience, they were able to make it through and make it to leadership roles. So we're doing all the right things, but we still had barriers that we encountered. We still had people who wanted to steal our dreams or to diminish us or make us feel like we didn't belong. So I wanted to, hearing these stories, I'm like, I want other people to hear these stories. I want other people to know what we've gone through. And Miss Manning, Miss Frankie Manning is going to be speaking. She really had a profound effect on me because she talked about colored wards and she talked about how women were treated in pregnancy then. And I'm like, if I would have known this, it could have even changed the way that I looked at research and looked at, finding my purpose and learning more about who I am and where I sit in this. So I didn't have any resources to do a documentary. So I was thinking of a website. So Dr. Peggy Chin, she said, I know a producer, Sue Hagedorn, and she's a nurse, she's a producer, and we could talk with her. So she was willing to do the documentary. So she brought in Rayanne LeBlanc, Peggy Chin. I feel like her and Christina Narity brought in Ms. Manning. Ms. Manning brought in Gail Robinson, Dr. Gail Robinson. And I brought in my colleague, Melissa Mokel. So that's how the team was developed and started. And so we all have been, in the very beginning, we have all been there as this was being put together. And we're going to talk about those pieces. But I just want to just say that background, because we knew that we wanted to capture these stories. And we were going to have one long documentary, but every story was so rich. Every story was different. And we saw that how racism showed up differently among everyone. But we also saw differently how people addressed the racism they experienced. So I'm going to go to I believe, is it Gail going to talk about our next question?
Well, it was just really giving a chance for everybody to sort of say, similar to you, is like, what does it mean to be involved in this? Maybe not how you got involved in it.
That's our next question.
Let's go down.
Yeah, that's our next question, Joe.
Right.
Yeah, Joe, that's our next question. Everybody is going to say what brought them to the project.
Yeah.
So, but Gail, I think, Gail, you were going to lead us in that, Or was
Okay,
it?
I will start.
Oh, it might have been me.
Well,
You'll start.
I will just say welcome, everyone here. My name is Gail Robinson. I am a nurse. I'm currently a assistant professor at Seattle University. I basically work with undergraduate students, and my area of research really looks at the health of Black women. And one of the things that has really caught my eye, though, is these intergenerational relationships around health and women. And so, one of the things that brought me to the project, not only did Miss Manning bring me to the project of this idea, but also the fact that we get to hear stories of nurses across different generational groups. And those stories begin to resonate, and there's a connection between them. And just being able to have the different talents of the group in the group being present is actually what has brought me in that core value of no harm, and to really lift up us as nurses and the work that we do. So that's what I would say is what brought me to the project. And this idea of justice, the social justice that we can bring to healthcare, is also what keeps me staying with the project. So that's my story. And then I would pass it on to you, Miss Manning.
Well, good morning, and it's great to be with all of you. I am the mature senior in the project, so I'm glad to see that Mark worked with singers. If you want to get warm, come to the great Northwest. We're not hot, but we're warmer than Australia and New Zealand. So, anyway, what brought me to the project was the whole concept and the idea that if we could do something to improve healthcare. I'm a retired nurse exec, and one of the things that I have worked with is I've always been committed for healthcare for all people, no matter who they are and what ages they were. And so, but I've observed the disparate treatment over the years. And so I wanted to continue to offer ways and to learn from others. And what has been powerful to me about this project is to watch across different ethnic groups the similarities, because often we think of ourselves as different, but in listening to the stories are often very similar, no matter what group you come from. And so I've been very grateful to be a part of this. I've learned a lot. What has been also powerful to me is to see how the communities come together, and we've never met each other. And so that is a great learning experience. So we have a lot of shared experience, even though we've not had that direct human contact. So I stay with the project because I think every time I'm going to go away, I learn something even better. But the power of the resilience of all of these people has been really just great for me. I've learned a lot. And so that's why I stay. And I want to see it better for my great-grandchildren as we come on, and for all human beings. So no matter what you look like, what you speak, that I hope in the future we all can get better health care. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Rayanne.
Thanks, Frankie. And it's just really wonderful to be with all of you today. And I just want to echo, like, what a privilege to be involved in this project. I can't hear you, Joe.
See, I can't find you in my list, so I got to change my view. So there you are, to spotlight you.
Oh, spotlight. So
yeah, sorry about that.
Really nice to be with you all, and just to stay with this group today. And what brought me to it really was these relationships. Having worked with Dr. Hagedorn before in this project called the Nurse Story Project that really lifted the voices of nurses and connected us to StoryCenter. So that's part of how this relationship came together. So story as a social justice mechanism, as a real way to connect with one another. But what's kept me here is the learning and the staying with and the listening power and the transformation I see in our profession, both from understanding a better history, but also our place in moving this work forward and addressing anti-racism as a profession. So these have been some deep relationships, a real caring community. And I've learned a lot both said and unsaid here. So I'm really, really grateful to be here. And I'll turn it over to Sharon.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Sharon Latimer Mosley. I am the former StoryCenter project coordinator. Now, as of last Friday, the project manager for the Reckoning with Racism in Nursing project. I came to the Reckoning project through Joe Lambert. During the pandemic, StoryCenter was my lifeline. I attended so many online storytelling workshops, COVID Stories with Amy Hill, and Next Up, which was a BIPOC storytelling group with Johnny Chang, who also worked on the Reckoning project with us. When Joe hired me, I said to him, "You don't even know me." Joe said, "I know you through your stories." And I think that's the power of the Reckoning with Racism and Nursing project, listening to story and seeing individuals beyond ideas you may have of others. My mother was also a nurse, and while talking to Lucinda one day, she realized that my mother in the 60s had gone to a nursing program at the university that she worked at. It was like a community nursing program. And so I am honored, and I think my mother made it possible for me to be on this project from above, because a lot of the things that the nurses have spoken about in the project from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, she was dealing with too. So I'm so happy to be a part of the project and to make a difference. Thank you.
And you would pass it on to?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think I would pass it on to Tia, right?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing. Thank you, Sharon.
You're welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tia Vo. I am Vietnamese American. My parents are from Vietnam, and I was born in Connecticut. I went to the University of Connecticut to obtain my college degree. I'm a first generational college student. And there's just so much history that I'm just going to briefly share. The way I was connected with Overdue Reckoning in Racism in Nursing was through Lucinda Canty, who we serendipitously met at her PhD defense. And so we did not know each other, but I felt like I knew her over 20 lifetimes. And so just things started unfolding. Peggy Chin was also my professor in one of her nursing theory classes. And so things unfolded where we just joined and we just went in 200%. And so the 5 weeks we participated, we shared our stories, and they were very rich, they were very deep, they were very vivid. And it was not just stories from one race, but all races. And it was just amazing how the things that we felt and shared, other people felt and shared them too. And then it was just inspiring, and this inspiration just kept kind of flowing, where people started just lifting up their voices and sharing. And the rooms were filled with hundreds of people from all over the world. And so this is how I became connected to Overdue. And Dr. Gail Robinson reached out to me saying that, "Tia, your story was powerful." Frankie Manning also recommended that the story be shared again. And so that's how I became further connected today. And just having these experiences as a bedside nurse in med-surg with, the relatively older population, especially those that don't speak English and are, come to the United States with, limited English skills and resources, it just really helps kind of you form these research questions throughout your PhD program. And so I currently work in maternity on a postpartum newborn unit floor. And so I would think that racism ended in med-surg, but it actually persists in all different specialties and all different fields of nursing. And that's what's kind of fueled my fire even more so today, because it doesn't exist in just one population in nursing, but also women in their 30s, women in their 20s, families, newborns. And so we really had to look at a lot more. And so I'm really excited to share and be a part of this digital storytelling conference today.
Thank you so much, Sia. Now we've had a chance to introduce ourselves. Joe, did you want to say more or how you got into the project?
Yeah, as soon as I removed the spotlight from Thea. I think, StoryCenter's history of doing projects where we're kind of doing long listing sessions is not as deep as our work, in these small digital story forms, the 2 to 3 minute films that we help individuals work on. But, the nature of this project and frankly, the idea that it was moving toward documentary intrigued me. And I wanted to be part of that. What we learned through doing it was the power of these peers talking to each other, nurses talking to nurses in a series of one-on-one sessions, which were, they were interviews, but they were also conversations in which people could reflect back to each other their experiences. And really to listen in on, I don't know what I listened into, a dozen of the 37, 38 interviews we did, it changed me, because the way that I was privileged into what were really hard discussions, lots of tears, lots of emotion. It kind of made me realize how much people who happen to have my skin tone, who are part of the European descended parts of our community, how little we know about the pain that's been caused by racism, and that there's no end to the need to listen. The theme of our conference is radical listening. And for me, being part of this project was a form of radical listening, and hopefully sitting in deep humility at the fact that there's so much work to do to repair what history's done to folks and continues to do to folks. So I thank the whole team for allowing me and our staff to be part of this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Joe. And that leads very well into demonstrating or illustrating some of our work. And I'm going to have Ms. Manning come back. 2 of our videos you're going to get a chance to see. And Mark, I do know that your question is in the chat box. We're going to come back to it. So I will not forget it, but I will come back to it. But I also want to share with you some of the work that we have done through the stories that we have captured. And I'll hand it over to Ms. Manning.
You're going to have an opportunity to have somewhat of a small experiential time with us this morning as you look at just a sampling of some of our many documentaries. And is the caring coming up first? So I think you will see that why all of us have been so engaged in this work. And I hope that you will find it engaging enough that you'll find it, go to the website and see some of the other documentaries. But I think what's powerful about the stories, you'll see small clips of individuals who have shared their stories, and how powerful those are as you look across the spectrum of caring for patients and educating people to care for patients. So I think you will learn a lot as we go through these. So this is our first one.
I had a student, ask me, can we refuse because of the color? And that really, shocked me.
I I identify as Latina. I am mixed race. My mother's Caucasian and my biological father's Peruvian.
My name is Nikki Akpariwa, and I identify as a Black woman.
I am Viviana Garcia. I always say my both last names. I identify as a Mexican.
I identify as Black African American.
I am an Asian, Indian born. I like to identify myself as a person of color.
We had a patient on our unit who had some medical issues that would provoke pain. He was having uncontrolled pain and poor response to pain medications, and so he quickly became labeled as a drug seeker.
I had a patient who was neglected, and he was Native American. The nurses on that floor were pretty much not paying attention to him.
There was a white nurse who had a patient that she left sort of unmonitored on his own to do his own HIPAA cleanse, which is the surgical scrub that you do before you go to surgery.
I had this patient the week before, and he was able to communicate with us and everything, and now he wasn't able to because he was also in a ventilator. He was quadriplegic. He knew how he wanted. He liked having his hair combed, always liked to be clean.
We've learned that patients in some instances will resort to their first primary language when they're in distress. And so he chose to speak in Spanish to express his pain and just feeling very hopeless about not being able to control it. Because I speak Spanish, I was often assigned to work with a patient.
This patient unplugged all of their monitoring device, came off of the monitor, which you're never supposed to do in a cardiac unit.
I do work with maternal mortality. A lot of it's preventable. It doesn't have to happen because of all the damage and trauma that happens if it does.
The palliative care team was consulted and in charge of his pain management regimen. And they had come up to me one day and they said, we really need you to be his primary nurse. Like every day you're working, please take him.
He had all these like dirty supplies everywhere. And I was so mad at that moment. I talked to my preceptor and I was like, hey, could you please just come into this room and tell me what's wrong?
This gentleman got discharged. The palliative care team came up to me about 3 months later and they said, we just wanted you to know, since you were so close to him, that he died at a nursing home. And he died from hypoglycemia.
Unfortunately, this patient coded and died. Someone found them. That is correct. I said it. Coded and died.
The moment she walked into the room, she's like, oh my goodness, this is so bad.
My colleagues chose to not use scientific knowledge to impact how they treated this patient or even carried out orders of a provider willingly, and there was no consequence to their behavior.
Historically, what they did on the unit, if those types of incidents happens, of course, this is a sentinel event, but you don't get cross-trained to the ICU because we were in both. We had an acute care and an ICU. They cross-trained this nurse, and I want to say it was within a matter of weeks to months.
I've really come to this 2021, I would say, my mantra for this year is we're the most trusted profession, but amongst whom? Patients of color are dying under our care, and we would rather let them die than hold our peers accountable.
On a nearly daily basis, you manage some level of stress or fear, and you develop your own.
That was probably my fault. I'm going to actually pick it up from the website instead of this YouTube. Thought it was
A little toolbox of ways to do it.
I
I'm
hate
obsessed.
ads, so forgive me for this. I did not think that that would happen. YouTube's making money.
I had a student, ask.
The courses.
Are we about where we were?
A little bit, yeah.
The path forward, right? Let's see if, let's pick it up.
Moving forward to address racism is everybody's problem. It's everyone's problem. Even if you think, I'm not racist, that's not me, that's somebody else doing that. Again, you're part of the system. And it's painful. It's painful to look at anything, especially nursing. We're trusted, we're caring. For someone to say that we're doing something that's supporting racism, and when implicit bias, all these things that people are trying to, is still basically racism. But we give it, we say unconscious bias so people could feel better. But that unconscious bias kills someone like me.
Implicit bias training needs to be a mandatory item for all nursing schools. I don't think any nursing school should be accredited while that's not a part of their curriculum. I think that not only does the education piece need to be there, but then that competency needs to be built into the courses. There was a lot of requests among students to say, like, we need to practice these skills. I need to know how to articulate to a colleague that I feel that their care is being impacted by bias, racism.
In the United States, a lot of people think of like the whites, you know, but in reality, America, in my opinion, is this pot of different cultures. We bring all these different cultures, all these mentalities, all these opinions, and that's what makes us beautiful. And I feel like that should be in the hospital as well, especially because we're treating people that are in the most vulnerable times and are scared.
We're in a place and space where there's a movement happening right now. This is giving me strength. It's the wind beneath my wings right now to know that we're in a movement, and there's a lot of collective energy around transitioning and changing and transforming the ways in which we look at ourselves in society and how we look at ourselves as nurses. So that has given me a lot of strength to continue going on.
I wanted to go into nursing because I wanted to be that person that when someone walks into the hospital or a clinic or any medical advice facility, they look for me. I want to be that person that gets to nurture them and care for them in their most vulnerable times. What gave me strength was my patients, especially the ones that were patients of color. Little remarks such as like, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have been able to make that call or hear my daughter's voice right now. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have been bathed until tonight or be able to understand what procedure I'm getting. Those comments made by the patients were the ones that kept pushing me until today.
I'm glad that we have these discussions, you know, trying to bring awareness about, you know, the word of racism and how people are, you know, different, you know, having differences. We are the most trusted, and I want nursing to continue as the most trusted profession, and that doesn't come without leaders.
I'll stop here and allow you to introduce it and try to cue it up so I can get past those commercials. I hate that. Go ahead, Frankie.
So I think, you know, as you listen to the stories, that you can hear the experience of the different nurses. But what is also important about the stories is that there's some shared conflict, but also resilience within the groups that are talking about what their personal experiences have been, what their observations have been, and how they see us going forward. So I think when you see more of the stories, you can understand why this project is so important. And it's not just important to us who are involved in this, it's important to the whole profession, because those themes go across all parts of our practice. And it's so important that we do no harm. And so I think as you listen, you will see others as you go along. And so the next film that we're going to watch is Thea's interview, which I think you'll find pretty powerful. It has always struck me as something, because I feel the experience myself each time I look at it. So Joe, you want to show the next one?
Indeed.
We're addressing racism in nursing.
First, I like to identify myself as a biracial Vietnamese American nurse scholar. So growing up, my mother is mixed. She is half white and half Vietnamese. And my father is 100% Vietnamese. And so growing up, I always didn't really identify with a certain ethnic group, but growing up, I was influenced by tradition. So my parents just transmitted their culture to me. And so I was unaware of the influences. I just received the tradition and culture and practices that they were raised up in. And so as a child, I just, that was what I grew up in. Language and culture and food were central to my identity, and it maintained my cultural identity. When I finished high school, I actually didn't know what I wanted to major in. And so my first semester of college at the University of Connecticut was in the business program. And so I realized that this wasn't who I was. And once again, I was in the identity area where you kind of lose yourself. And so in losing myself, I was able to find myself, and I explored a little bit more, went to a couple sessions about nursing in the School of Nursing, and I petitioned into the School of Nursing and I got in. And after taking a couple courses in the nursing school, I realized that this was my calling, this was my passion, and I could really flourish and bring forth who I was, my identity, my culture, and my caring aspects about myself that no other profession could really bring out. Being around different students, being around different professors that have different diversity as well, even though the School of Nursing is majority white. But seeing some Asian nurses and professors and scholars in the School of Nursing, and just at different conferences that you might attend, is encouraging, because Asians are historically underserved population in research, as well as, I would say, in academia. And so when I say being a Vietnamese American nurse scholar, that is a very kind of fluid term, because we're still progressing. We're still trying to share our voice. We're still trying to step out of the model minority, which is an overused term. It has really changed how I view myself, and how class, gender, and race, really, the intersectionality of those three, it really influences how you bring your nursing care into the hospital, at the bedside, with the patients, with your clients, people of color, and how we really need to understand each person and each individual has their own cultural identity. Being involved in these conversations and hearing these nurses share their voices, especially the Black and Brown community, it really touched my heart and inspired me to really see how people in my community were being racialized, and that sometimes we internalize ideas from the white dominant groups for such a long time, especially when their voices have been so dominant in the nursing profession, such as instructors, professors. When one night I worked, all the nurses on the evening and night shift, so swing and night shift, were Asian. They were Filipina majority, and Vietnamese, Chinese, and I'm Vietnamese. That's when I realized that was a structural aspect of racism at play. And the supervisor, I brought it up to her attention, and I said, I told her, I asked her, and we get along, she has humor, I have humor. And I said, hey, all the nurses on night shift are Asian. And then she said, yeah, because we're all racist, right? And obviously with sarcasm, there's always a hint of truth behind it, right? It's not always 100% joking around. And so I laughed, I said, haha. But inside, when I walked away and she went down to the elevator, she pushed the button, I was thinking about that for a bit. Maybe there was a reason or rationale behind keeping the Asians on night shift. Filipina nurses were one of the largest Asian populations to have died during the COVID-19 pandemic, because they've been hired to take care of these patients. They were given tough assignments that had a majority of COVID-19 patients being evaluated for worsening progression of COVID-19 or COVID-19 itself. We see that these nurses, because of class, because they need to continue working to support their families, to feed the mouths of their children, to pay the bills, to pay rent. We see these clinical nurses, particularly Asian people of color, still working at the bedside and getting sick. There is a disparity during the COVID-19 pandemic where Asians are dying from it, working on evening and night shifts, and just we need to really examine that and see what are the variables that are influencing them getting COVID-19 compared to white nurses. We need to look at that. In the community that I work in, it's a fairly white city or town. And so sometimes when I take care of them, they ask me, oh, are you Chinese? Are you Ching Chong? Oh, your eyes look slanted. Where are you from? And I say, oh, I'm from Quincy. And they say, no, where are you really from? And I say, oh, I'm from Connecticut. I was born and raised there. And they say, oh, Connecticut, that sounds like you're wealthy. So there's just so many different kind of microaggressions that patients sometimes, I'm not sure if they recognize that they're being racist, but these questions they continue to be asked when I encounter new patients, especially men, Caucasian men. And I've kind of become numb to it. I kind of know how to redirect their questions. I say, I'm from Quincy, and I say it's inappropriate. I'm your nurse, and I'm here to take care of you. And I really don't know where their questions come from or what algorithm in their mind makes them ask these questions. People assume that you're from one country, where in Asia it's not just China, and most of the times they think that you're from China because it's the country that is mostly predominant in China. It takes up a lot of space if you look at a world map, but there's over 40 different countries in Asia, and a lot of people, especially Westerners, they fail to acknowledge that for some reason, even if they know. So there's especially South Asia, some people don't even consider Indian people Asian, but technically they're South Asian. So there's just a lot of learning. There's a lot of learning that needs to take place. There needs to be training for instructors, for professors. There needs to be a cultivation of cultural desire in these professors. It's not just one workshop. It's not just 2 workshops or 3 workshops. It's kind of like you can't require them. You can't impose these future professors, these future instructors to attend these workshops and just sit through them. There has to be some way, some springboard of action, some cultural desire that's cultivated inside of them, so that they can really, when they really look at curriculum, when they really look at what courses are being taught, though these courses might not say in the title anything about culture or anything about race, gender, or class in nursing, because most of it is clinical for undergraduates. But what inside these courses, what can we teach our students? And it doesn't have to be big, it can be small. What things do you see that you can advocate for racial justice? Is there something going on between the nurses and the client? springboard students into new avenues, new paths that they haven't walked before, things like that, things that engage students. And not all will engage, not all will have a cultural desire. I'm not saying everyone will. There's going to be some pushback. Some people might still, be comfortable in their own comfort zone. And that's okay. Everyone is different. But for those students that are passionate, for those students that want to share their voice, those students will definitely be identified and they will emerge. And for that makes me hopeful for the future of nursing and for the next 50 years. There's so many voices that need to be shared. There's so many voices that are left to be uncovered, or phenomenon or experiences that are left to be uncovered. And so with that just really gives me hope, just knowing that there are so many different marginalized populations that it is our imperative and it is our responsibility to really make it easier for these populations to access equitable healthcare and provide them with a sense of social justice. Nurses of color who are standing in solidarity of what I'm doing, and as well as they stand in solidarity with me, I stand in solidarity with them. We support each other, and to have that sense of support, I don't think I would be here today.
Back to you, Frankie.
Thank you, Thea. I think when you see Thea's story, you can hear the power of her not only her resilience, but her experience. And the fact of that she's experienced this on to get a PhD, it gives me lots of hope to know that we're all going to continue to grow. So, Thea, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Ms. Manning. I really appreciate, and I am honored and flattered that you feel this way about me. I'm sorry if my puppies are squealing in the back. My sister just left to go to New York. Yes, actually, before I defended my PhD on April 6, 2023 at 10 in the morning, I can still remember that day vividly. I was going to bed the night before. I was staying at a lady's house in the local town so that I wouldn't be late for my defense. So I was having trouble sleeping, and I was praying. I said, you know what can I do that will calm me down, will release my stress, will just kind of give me strength and give me that kind of hope and resilience for tomorrow. And so I turned on the video release of Overdue Reckoning and Racism in Nursing, and I went back to the transcript and I read it over alongside in sync with the video. And I watched the video, the 11-minute video or 12-minute video, and after ending it, it really gave me strength. My whole body changed. I felt almost like rocks on my shoulder just falling down my neck. All the stress and anxiety, just preparing for that defense, it just disappeared. And so just hearing the journey that Riley, hearing the journey that I took all the way from the bedside and during, your graduate program, the PhD program, it gave me strength, and it just let me know, or just maybe the universe let me know that everything's going to be okay. Tomorrow's going to be fine. You're going to do well, and the future is bright. And so I do frequently go back to these videos, and I actually posted it on my different social media accounts as the kind of the video to watch that just shares about kind of like my whole life from childhood to adolescence. I talked about childhood cultural tradition, and then in high school I talked about peer groups and not having that kind of social group to identify with, and kind of not having that sense of belonging, and then all the way through becoming a nurse, and then dealing with those struggles and strengths, and seeing racism right before my eyes, and not just in my ethnic group, but also in different racial groups as well, and standing up for those people. And I've shared these experiences in different reckoning meetings as well. And then all the way through graduate school and PhD, the PhD program, where I didn't speak so much on it because that was the time that that was during the time that I was doing the video with Miss Fanning and Joe. And so just moving forward, there are just so many more kind of moments and different examples to kind of provide that kind of just, you know, when the time is right, that we can share them, and at different meetings such as this. And so one of the things that I would just say, like the caveat and the key to kind of going through all these kind of moments and feelings and emotions is through storytelling. I think through storytelling, it's at the heart of research that we really need to keep and just kind of take notes of and reflection of how we're feeling, and to really give participants power. And through storytelling, we can provide them with this power. And so this speaks to like marginalized groups, Black, Indigenous, Asian groups, people that have not really had a hand in research or had an opportunity to speak, especially I would say, such as my dissertation, I interviewed 11 Vietnamese women who gave birth. And when I looked back on that year where I was recruiting and when I was interviewing them and doing a follow-up interview, I remember hearing the participants saying how empowered they felt. And for me, that really touched me. And in the moment where you're interviewing them, you don't really understand like how much they feel, because you're trying to, you know, follow the method, follow things rigorously to the T. And so when you hear these kind of things and hear how much empowerment that you give someone else, that just gives me so much strength and just so much kind of more desire to keep going. And I really hope that other researchers also feel this way too.
Thank you, Thea. So I'm going to turn this over to Sharon, who'll tell you a little bit more about the StoryCenter process. That was great.
Okay. Oh, do you just want me to start?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry. So the first thing we did, how have we shared the project? And the way that we've shared the project is through the UMass Our Voices 2, in which we share the projects in more than one way. We share the project through our website, and I believe there's a link in the chat if you want to check out the website. All the videos are there. We also have we have short thematic documentaries there as well, which we ask you to ask yourself 3 reflective questions, and then you can respond in the blog. We also have a newsletter that we send out to subscribers. So if you'd like to be a part of that, please subscribe. Lucinda and a lot of the other committee members have gone out and done talks and symposia. And we've also developed our own through UMass, which is called Our Voices, in which we invited participants to be facilitators during the conference and lead discussion after watching the videos, lead discussions after watching the videos in breakout rooms. Let's see how else. We're working on having a social media presence right now. So how we're developing a community of nurses through our website. So we have a core group, and we have a core group of participant nurses who we get together periodically to discuss different topics. So what practices did we use to ensure the narrative control of nurses of color? We informed them of everything and got their releases and permission for each step. So when we did their videos, they were able to watch their videos, give comments, tell us whether or not they wanted to continue with the project, and we still allowed them to do that. So when we created like the small documentary that you saw, we asked their permission again. We asked the nurses who participated in that documentary, would they like to continue with the project? Do they want their image to still be in this small documentary? And they give us their permission, and we keep an archive of that. Let's see, I'm just trying to see if I missed anything. Okay. I forgot to mention being mindful of the interviewer and interviewee. What we found is when we were doing these interviews and talking about racism is very difficult. So we had to arrange our interviews so that one person wasn't doing 5 or 6 interviews in a row, because it was very difficult to hear the stories. And we encouraged people to take breaks. We, if someone couldn't do an interview, another nurse on the committee would do the interview, and these were peer-to-peer interviews. I think I answered everything.
You did. You did. Thank you. You did a great job. So that's quite great. So Gail, you want to give a discussion about what it was like working in these very challenging times?
Yes, ma'am, Miss Manning. And then you all have heard, you've introduced us, you heard about our background, our principles of reckoning, and you've heard and had opportunity to not only listen to, but to feel and even hear from Tia in terms of the story and the impact it has on us. One of the things that working with the team, not only was there transformation from when we listened to others' stories, there was transformation happening with the group, but you also have to understand the talent that came to the group and the behind the work that was done to capture the videos and the work that went into that. And so what I want to be able to share with you is this interdisciplinary team of individuals who didn't know each other come together and just begin to bring their talents. And we actually grew. We did things that we didn't know we could do. But what was so powerful is that we had this belief that what we were doing is important. We had some shared values, and it began to show in the work that we were doing. Yes, we had to deal with some difficult challenges. We're dealing with a difficult topic. But in expressing that, and really when we got to be able to hear in more of the nurses' stories, the more we began to say, we're on to something so important that it must be shared. And any way that we can bring our talents to it, that is what we did. You know, you have the nurses who brought their perspectives, and we come from a lot of disciplines. You have Joe coming from the StoryCenter and the editing and the video talent that came with that. You have the project management that came with that to be able to do it. You had our expertise coming from academics. You had us coming from the clinical environment. So you had all of that coming together to make this work. And so that's what I would like to be able to show with you. The things that made it work was, one, our willingness. We made the decision that we were going to be a part of it. We had the intent that we were going to be inclusive. We also respected the fact that we were intergenerational. And, you know, you had the young, you had those in the middle, you had the mature elders, and we were able to bring all that together in one group at a table and make it a discussion and bring our resources together. So that's the components that I would say that really made this work. Is not only did you have a willingness, but you have some real skills and competencies that were brought to this to make what you see happen today happen. And we did a lot of listening. I really have to stress that we did a lot of listening to each other. We had to work on not interrupting each other in our own discussions so we could also be heard. So that's what I would like to be able to share. And if there's those who want to add something to that from the panel, I'm going to offer you to do that, because this also is going to lead into what do we mean by radical listening. Anyone want to add something to that? And if no one wants to add, then I would say this leads right into talking about radical listening. And Mark, if you're still here, I'm hoping you begin to see what we mean by reckoning, coming to terms with racism in nursing and how it's becoming and why it's so important for us. But we're still going to address this even more so in the question and answer, but you see why we have the passion for what we're doing. All right. Then Ms. Manning, I'll bring that back to you and Rianne on radical listening. And what do we mean by that?
Frankie, you want to take the lead, or maybe Frankie went somewhere? So I'm happy to start. Frankie was going to answer this question first, and we've already talked about this yesterday, but what does radical listening mean? And I kind of want to bring it back to how Lucinda introduced us to the reckoning, the principles of reckoning, and how that positions us to listen and to center voices, and what that really means. And also moving, if you were available for the keynote, when Lisa Nelson Haynes spoke about preserving our shared humanity, and the steps of that listening, as Frankie had talked about in our prep for this, were one was listening, hearing, feeling, embodied experience. And I think one of the radical parts is the transformative aspects that happen when we begin to go internally, the internal listening, as well as that external hearing. And so being with what we are hearing in ourselves, that comes up bearing witness to stories. When we're with someone telling their story, there's so many levels. And as others in our group have talked about, we really have used radical listening throughout our entire processes. Even yesterday, we all shared a story individually. Frankie had heard something, was being the listener of our group, and had individually reached out to each one of us at different times. And that kept our shared humanity. That was a process of listening and responding in a very different way. And that's been intertwined throughout the whole process. From the people, I think about Mary, Sharon had put Mary Kimmo's name in the chat, and Johnny, the people on the technical team of StoryCenter, and all the time they spent with the stories listening, and it showed in the care and execution of the work that they did. So I think we're just discovering in many ways our own radicalness and what that really means when we come together and listen together, and we center voices, and we know how to go deep with what we're feeling too. And that doesn't always have to be shared, but it is part of the transformative process. So I'll leave it there, and anyone from our group can add to it.
No, and the only thing that I would add to that is this: the power of transformation. I have to keep repeating that particular phrase, because there was a level of empowerment and a level of freedom that we have actually experienced. And I'll speak more for me as being a part of this project: the ability to stand up more, to ask more questions, to be more vocal, to be able to call things out more, has been something that, as a result of this project, we see happening. So that's the piece that I would just add to that, Rayanne. And then I see Mark also had another wonderful question that he ended up asking us in terms of our interviews. And it asked us whether or not we made interviews as a group, or were our interviews done individually. And we started out, Mark, I'm going to go address that one. We actually did start out doing individual interviews. In our second set, we actually began to do focus groups. We did a focus group of PhD students. We did a focus group of students of color, and we did several of them. We did focus group of nurses who had more than 40 years of experience in nursing, to get their different views. So we did have an opportunity to do some group work. And the results of that, we still got to take time and analyze over the summer, but we did get a chance to go a little bit deeper in that. Now, Mark, I like engaging, and I asked you earlier, as you were seeing things, what did you begin to see about reckoning? So I'm just totally curious, Mark, based on what you've seen, if you were to say what is reckoning, what would that mean to you from what you've seen?
Well, I think I started off as a curious question because in our language in Australia, it's not something that I'm familiar with, reckoning. It's more, as I was saying, it's more like reconciliation and giving voice. But I think it's more like righting a wrong. It's really, what I've heard is really the injustice that people face and the commonality. You know, it isn't just one person, but it's the difference, the injustice through difference, that basically people who feel disenfranchised because somehow there's a silent majority that's implied and people feel that they have more rights than someone else. And I think it's only through that's why I asked the question about the group, because when you have when you have the experience individually, you don't necessarily know that other people, even someone with a different background, has a similar experience. That's when you realize, my God, we have things in common, that we're actually disenfranchised and we're disempowered. So a reckoning, I guess, is very, very loud that I hear in these beautiful stories is, you know, like we want to right the wrong. We want to be heard. We want to have to be understood rather than judged. And there's a sort of assumption that you don't have, for some reason, you don't have a voice and you don't have an equal right, you know, because of the color of your skin or your background or whatever. And I think that's something that you can only find in common. And I'm glad you've done it as a group, because it's when you do it in a group, you realize the normalization of those things, and you realize the common experiences that people have, that it isn't just you because of your culture, but it's actually other people as well feel that way. And the tremendous, what Thea was saying about being empowered through the collaborative process and the process that other people shared and supported, you know, because you can easily be isolated, you know, and I think that's very, very important. You don't even have a chance to know your story to be heard by other people. Yeah, I just add one little thing is I did some interviews with staff. It's not the same, but staff during COVID, and we had a terrible time with deaths in aged care, you know, and the moral injury that the staff felt unsupported when they had to go in every day and be unsupported by the administrators, supported them with more with criticism about what they should be doing rather than supporting them in their everyday experiences. And for the first time, I was just doing an interview for a webinar just to hear their voice, but just having them together, talking together about their experiences, even from the same facility, they realized that they didn't know each other. They didn't know that someone mother died in India and someone else had to go and couldn't go to the funeral and all those sorts of things. And it gave them through this opportunity of simply listening to their story, they were actually realizing how they had a similar experience of each other, that they hadn't had a chance to talk even. So I can understand in a different way how this has happened. So I'm learning about the word reckoning and how important and fitting it is.
Oh, thank you, Mark, for your comments. And you got it. I think you nailed it. You got it. Now, Miss Manning, Brianne was also asking, is there more that you wanted to add about radical listening?
I think I got in on the tail end of, I had to take a short break, but anyway, of Rand's presentation, and I think she covered it. But I have to tell you, the power of listening And really listening is very different than when you are just hearing the words. Is the experiential part of it where you actually feel it from your heart. You almost are there in place with the person. And so I still experience the lady that Thea told us about in the collective group, who she had waited all day just to go to the bathroom, and nobody had even talked to her. And you can just imagine from a personal level how that felt. But, and if you're the provider, you also can understand what it is from what the patient or the client is experiencing when they tell you that story. So the power of stories and listening is so powerful. So when you can feel it from your heart and get there with the person, it really allows us to not to be theoretical about the process or stereotypical. We can experience and hear what the individual is experiencing. And that's a little bit more, Mark, about what part of the power of the collective wisdom of the group is that when we are in the group, we can hear those stories and we can feel from listening to our peers and colleagues similar kinds of experience. And we can just imagine as what it would be like as a human being. And so it's very different when you're listening for the words versus experiencing and listening from the core. So I think this is such a powerful experience, not only in telling our stories, but also listening to others' story, because it really helps you to understand the value of another human being, and also helps you to understand you are not alone, and that collectively we all can do something about this, because this means the health of each human being, not just whether it's a Black person or an Asian person or whatever. We can do better as humans.
And I know we're running out of time and we're getting down to close. So Sharon, I see that your hand is up on something you wanted to be able to say. And if anything else I wanted to say is just thank y'all for the opportunity for us being here. Go ahead, Sharon.
I think what we forgot to mention and what we include in most of our programs is a moment to breathe. Because I think when other people of color see these stories, it can be overwhelming. So after you watch the story, you need to breathe. Some people may need to step away and come back, but breathing is very important, and taking a moment after you watch the video to just breathe. Yeah.
Well said, Sharon. So we thank our group of presenters today for joining us, and we thank all of you that listened into this. This is a project that we hope to have at future digital storytelling conferences, having it continue to grow and flourish, and look for the longer documentary and some more short documentaries on the Reckoning website in the months to come. So we're excited to continue this work, and to Lucinda and Gail and Frankie and Tia and Sharon, you guys, you rock my world. So thank you for letting me be part of your whole process. Rayanne as well. I didn't mean to leave Rayanne out. No.